Hi, Peter. Welcome to the show.
Hey, John, thank you very much. So glad to be here.
Nice to see you. So you live in Vermont.
I do. Yes, I actually not originally from Vermont, but we lived in upstate New York when I was growing up. And my uncle had a condo over at Okemo, which is the ski mountain in Vermont. And we used to go over maybe once a month in the winter to ski at Okemo. And I remember going home when I was like 10 or 12, like whenever we had to leave, I was just kicking and screaming. I said, let's stay here and live here. And my father goes, well, when you're older, I said, you can move to Vermont. He goes, and I'll probably move there with you. And so when my wife and I graduated from our residency training, I'm a physician by training. When we graduated from residency, we drove up to Vermont and we just stopped in a bunch of hospitals. And we found a hospital in the Rutland area that really wanted two family doctors. And we've been here for the last 30 years.
Hmm,
And
interesting.
I will add that after we moved to Vermont, my father and mother did move here 1 year later.
Now, when did you start writing a book?
So I wrote a story when I was in the fourth grade. My English teacher at the time, she thought I had some talent for writing stories. So I used to do a lot of creative writing. I wrote this one story about a police officer, a canine detective, and his dog, but I wrote it from the perspective of the dog. And Mrs. Dawes, my fourth grade English teacher, she really liked it. I ended up submitting it to the New Yorker. And I like to tell people I got my first rejection letter when I was 10 years old. And but so I did a lot of writing then. Until I got about to high school. I started a book when I was in the eighth grade. I got about 100 pages into it. And then when I got into high school, I was a three-sport athlete and, studying. And I guess I didn't have any time to write again until I turned 40. As I was mentioning, 15 years ago when the hospice program came in, and all of a sudden I went from 80 hours a week to down to 50. I had a lot more time in my life, and I started writing again then. At first, I didn't really have a ton of time to do it, so I made time by waking up every day at 4:30 in the morning. And I had read an article about John Grisham doing the same thing.
Hmm.
As it turns out, there's a lot of other writers who I've subsequently met who did the same thing. I was just recently talking to David Baldacci, and David Baldacci did the same thing. Woke up and still, in fact, he still wakes up early in the morning, even though he's a full-time writer now. So for about a year, I woke up at 4:30 in the morning until I finished my first manuscript. And I actually stopped doing that, but because at that time my kids were getting older, I was having more time during the day or weekends to write.
You're hoping to be a full-time writer?
Yeah, so I'll turn 60 at the end of the year, and that's why I'm going to go down to part time. I would love to be a full time writer, but the doctoring gig pays a lot better. And we were just talking about
Mm.
your careers in terms of what you really love to do versus what pays the bills. And I also would like to keep practicing medicine because I've known some of my patients for 30 years, and I would just really miss them, and I kind of want to keep up with them and see what they're up to. So I imagine I'll always try to work at least 1 or 2 days a week for a while. Just as I say, just because I would miss my patients.
Mhm.
But then I'll use the rest of the week then to do more writing. I'm interested in writing film.
Okay.
I have a screenplay started, and I've actually taken a couple of courses on screenwriting. So that's another thing I'd like to do as well.
Yeah, that's a whole different kind of writing, I understand.
It
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
It's very, very different, and there are a lot of book authors that have actually been screenwriters as well, and I think it's doable. Um, I, it seems to me that it'd be a lot easier from one standpoint. For one thing, a full length movie is only about 110 pages of screen
Yeah.
because for every page it's about a minute on the screen, and you want your movie to be about 100 and 10 100 somewhere in there, 110 minutes,
Yeah.
just short of 2 hours.
Sure.
Especially as a full-time screenwriter, or as a new screenwriter, you don't want to write a 4 hour movie. Nobody's going to buy it.
That's right.
So I think as a debut screenwriter, you want to come in right around about 110 minutes, according to the instructors from this class I took.
Good.
And that's about a minute a page. So 110 pages is a lot better than writing a book, because most of my books are like anywhere from like 300 to 350 pages long.
Hmm.
So it's quite a bit shorter, which is, it seemed to be, it would be easier.
So now let's get to your books. There's one called The Vatican Conspiracy. There's another one called The Vatican Secret, and then The Intern. I also noticed that there's an Italian version of The Vatican Conspiracy.
Yeah, yeah, I was so pleased about that. My editor gave me a call one day and a couple of years ago and said, "Hey, there's an Italian company that wants to print your book," and so that was great. And because I've always wanted, I mean, as a writer, I'm not sure about you, but I've got all these boxes I want to check as a writer, and one of the boxes I wanted to check was foreign rights, and so I was so pleased about that. And in the book, and the Italian version has done well too, which has been really nice for me. Um, I got contacted by a Portuguese company as well, and that deal ended up falling through. Another box I've got to check is film rights, and I don't. No one's bought the film rights for any of my books yet, but I have had several inquiries. One day I got an email from this place called the Rights Center, and it turns out this is a clearinghouse for people who write books, and the film studios, or any kind of like screen type of operation. If they're interested in a book, and making it into a movie or a series or what have you, I'm not sure there's any difference nowadays between movies and TV shows. But they contact the Rights Center to see if the rights of that have already been published, because they obviously, or already been bought, because they obviously don't want to proceed if somebody already has it. So I've had actually a couple inquiries for my books from the Rights Center. Nothing more than that, unfortunately. But that is another box I would like to check. Is obviously you'd like to get your book made into a movie.
Sure.
And so I'm still hoping for that. It's obviously something that every writer hopes for and very few get.
Yeah.
But it's out there lurking.
Now, which one is your first book?
My first book that I wrote was called a book called by the name of the Lazarus Manuscript, and that was essentially a medical, political, and legal thriller. And I was never able to get that one published. I did sign with an agent, a literary agent for that one, but the agent was never able to get it published. And my agent, shortly after she signed for that, she only was in probably agenting for another 2 or 3 months. And then she decided to quit agenting and become a full-time writer. So I lost my agent. And when that happened, I kind of took it as a sign from God that, all right, this manuscript is not going anywhere. And I had started the Vatican Conspiracy at that point in time. I started that book in 2009, and I ultimately signed with an agent with it in 2013. It took me 4 years of writing, revising. I had a lot of interest from agents initially when I wrote the book in like 2011. And so but they all, they were interested, but they wanted me to revise and resubmit it. And so by the time I finished the revisions and the resubmissions, it was early 2013. And after I did that, and I sent the manuscript back out, I had 7 offers of representation for that book.
Mm.
So I go to a lot of writers conferences, and one of the and sometimes as a participant, and sometimes as a faculty member. And when I'm in panels at the conferences, and a lot of writers want to know about agents and things like that, because it's something every writer wants to get an agent, and it's very, very difficult to do. And what I tell them is this: the reason I was able to do that is because I submitted widely. I listened to the response to the criticism that I got, and I got better as a writer. And when I was shopping around the Vatican Conspiracy, I got a lot of criticism, and I took that to heart. And when I rewrote that manuscript, I had 7 offers. I wrote another book called The Intern. It started out as a short story that I wrote about something that happened to me when I myself was an intern. I met this young man one day on call, and on pediatrics call, and the kid had just made such an impression on me. I still think about him, 35 years later. And so I decided to make a short story out of it. And I put the short story up on some internet sharing sites, and I got a lot of really good reviews on it, and I got a lot of followers. So I just kept on writing it. And it ended up being a full novel. So I took it down off the internet sharing sites, That actually came out before. It took me so long to get the Vatican Conspiracy out and published that the Intern came out first. So that was my first book. But I want to write in some other veins. I've always been interested in science fiction and fantasy. I read a lot of fantasy in addition to thrillers. And I've got a epic fantasy rolling around in my head that I want to write.
Yeah.
And it's great for you as a writer because I think you're expanding your the breadth of what you do. I think it's wonderful for you as a writer. I'm not so good sure it's good for you as an author. An author, or certainly as an author who wants to be published.
Yeah.
They want you to kind of stay funneled into that little narrow niche.
The show is called Tell Me About Your Book. Would you like to tell me about the Vatican Conspiracy?
So the Vatican Conspiracy all stemmed from me taking a trip. When I graduated from college, me and my buddies filled up our backpacks with a bunch of shorts and T-shirts, and we trundled off to Europe. And just kind of, my parents bought me a Euro pass for my graduation present from college, and I spent the whole summer in Europe. And we ended up in this place called Monte Rosso, which is in the Cinque Terre in Italy. It's kind of like the Italian Riviera, some people have referred it to. The Cinque Terre is actually one of the nicest spots on earth. I think a lot of people would agree. It's actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's truly, truly marvelous. The Cinque Terre means the five lands. So there's these five villages, and they're separated. They're connected by a walking path that goes along the cliffs. It's a remarkable place. And so when I was there, I said to myself, this would be the world's best setting for a book. So I thought to myself, I want to write a book that one of the settings of this book is the Cinque Terre. And I just needed characters and a plot. And it took me a lot of years to come up with those. But I ultimately came up with a character that I wanted. And that came from an experience I had at a writing conference I went to. I went to a writing conference a number of years ago. And the guy it was specifically about writing thrillers, which I love to read. And he was saying, listen, the thriller marketplace is extremely crowded. And you have to break in, you have to create something totally new. But you also have to do it in the same old tried and true formula that all thrillers use. And my twist was that my main character was a Jesuit priest. Rather than have a kind of a James Bond type character, if you read thrillers, you'll notice that so many of these people are, they're ex-CIA agents, they're FBI agents, they're retired cops, mm-hmm. they're disgruntled war veterans. It's all the same mold. And so in my case, I had a priest as the main character in a thriller. And what happens to him is he's in his church, and his old girlfriend comes to see him for confession, and she confesses that she's part of she got rooked into this plot. She thought she was bringing people into the country to find work, but what she's actually been doing is bringing terrorists into the country, and their mission is to kill the Pope. And so she has no idea what to do. They've taken her daughter as a hostage. And she knows that she's got to bring the last group of terrorists in this one night. She knows they're going to kill her when she does this, and she comes to confession because she's fearful for her soul. But she also knows that this priest, who's by the name is Marco Vanetti, he's always taking care of her, in the world, and she thinks that maybe he'll find some solution to this, some way out of this terrible dilemma that she's in. And this is just the first couple of chapters, so I'll tell you what happens. So he does. He goes. She takes her fishing boat. She goes out to sea to pick these guys up, and she doesn't realize that he's actually gotten onto the board with her, stowed away the board with her, so that when the terrorists come onto the boat, he actually is able to kill them all, and then they're able to save her daughter, and then the plot unfolds from there. Obviously, the Pope. They need to save the Pope, and this is just the beginning of the book, but. That's how that book started.
Cool.
And I was sitting in that church in the Cinque Terre looking at these old confessionals, and the idea kind of germinated in my mind over the next 20 years.
Well, that's great. You had a great opportunity to be able to go to that part of the world and have that experience. It is said that we should always write what we know. And if you know that much, by all means, write it.
It's interesting you say that because I was just listening to Dan Brown. So Dan Brown is one of my favorite authors. He wrote, the Da Vinci Code, and which is the best-selling thriller of all time. And I was actually went to a conference where he was speaking, and you know what he said? He says, I don't the old adage about writing what you know. He goes, I don't believe in that. He goes, I think you should write what you want to know. If you're interested in something and you want to know about it, that's what you should write about, because that's going to lead you to do the research. That's going to give you the passion to do the research that's necessary for writing a good book.
The Vatican Secret, that's the second book?
I left some things hanging at the end of book one. There were several people that say, hey, wait a minute, you know what? I bought this book. I wanted all these threads to have been kind of tied by the end of book one. But basically, I just fell in love with these characters, especially the main character, this Jesuit priest, Father Marco Vanetti, and his old girlfriend, who he saves. And so I fell in love with these people. Also, there's a cardinal that he works with at the Vatican by the name of Cardinal Lucci. And I just couldn't imagine these, not kind of, living with these characters for longer. So I got the opportunity to write book two, which was wonderful. And I do have books 3 and 4 planned as well. It's just that I wanted to take a little bit of a break and work with this new book called The Woman from Death Row.
Mm-hmm.
And The Woman from Death Row is about this woman. She grew up in a strip club. Her mother was the star stripper of this kind of second-rate strip club in Los Angeles, and she gets pregnant. And because she's the star stripper, the boss lets her live and raise the baby in her changing room. So she kind of uses her changing room as her living space and raises her daughter in this strip club. And when the girl's 14, she comes home. This girl's, by the way, was Jade. And so her mother named her daughter after her own stage name. So this lady's name, whatever it was, her stage name was Jade, and that's what she names her daughter. And the reason that she makes these bad decisions is because she's an OxyContin addict. Okay. As many strippers are, she has a drug problem. And so her daughter comes home one day, she's 14 years old, and she finds her mother dead, overdosed on OxyContin. And she's promised herself that if this ever happens, she's going to kill the drug dealer that supplied her mother with drugs. So the opening chapter is this girl, Jade, killing the drug dealer who supplied her mother with drugs. And that's kind of the prologue of the book. The book then takes up the action another 10 years later, when Jade has been caught for that crime, sent to reform school, made it out of reform school and gone to UCLA and then to medical school. And now she's an actual surgeon, but she's still got the kind of same mindset that she had growing up. I mean, when you think about it, when you're growing up in a strip club and your mother's an OxyContin addict, I'm not sure that even going to college and medical school and becoming a surgeon can really kind of, exercise all the demons that you've got, growing up in that type of upbringing. And that was one of the kind of things that I wanted to explore in this book. And it's also going to be a 2-book series, is like, how much can you change from your upbringing? And that's always been something that's very, very interesting to me.
Yeah, me too.
So I'm hopeful that Jade is going to be able to change. Anyway, so she's now a surgeon, and she practices. She only takes care of the low rent, kind of the people from the low rent side of town, because she likes these people. These are the people she grew up with, and she's comfortable with them. So she does most of her services for free. She takes care of prostitutes and people that are down and out and don't have any other way of medical care. But these are the people that she feels comfortable with. Anyway, one of her patients is being abused by her boyfriend, who's also a drug dealer. And she tells the guy, listen, if you keep abusing him, I'm going to kill you. So the first chapter of the book, this girlfriend that she's taking care of, she comes in and she's clearly been abused by her boyfriend again. And the boyfriend's sitting out in his car in the front of her office. So she walks out there and says, listen, what did I tell you when you abused her the last time? He said, he doesn't say anything. She said, I told you I was going to kill you if this happened again. And he's like, you really shouldn't talk smack like that. And her response is, I don't talk smack. So she goes back into the office, fixes up this girl, wakes up in the middle of the night, goes to the apartment of the boyfriend who's abusing her, and she slits his throat.
Mhm.
Because that's, that's the kind of person that she is.
Yeah.
That's her upbringing. She's also, one of the things that you have to be careful in a book like this is you want to make your main character a sympathetic and likable person. So how do you make this girl who's now killed two people, how do you make her sympathetic and likable? And it's a challenge, which I was really, one of the things I was interested about this book is that there's a lot of challenging aspects of writing it. But I think you can do it because number one is this girl has got a lot of positive traits. Number one is she's always looking out for people who are down and out. She's true to her word, and she's also she's courageous. She's no shrinking violet. She's a tough girl, and so these are all positives for her, and that make the reader find her sympathetic and likable. And so the question is, where do you go from there? And then that's what the book unfolds from there. But that's the basic gist of the book.
Cool. That's good.
And it all started out when I was in college. When I graduated from college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And so the CIA came to my college, and they had open interviews. So I said, I don't have anything to do. I'm going to sign up for a CIA interview. So I sat down with the CIA interviewer, and I was fascinated by the process. And by the end of the interview, it was quite clear to both me and the interviewer that I would be the worst CIA agent on the face of the earth. And then I ended up getting into medical school shortly thereafter that and going to medical school. But it occurred to me that, so many of the decisions we make in our life, and sometimes we make these somewhat randomly. I have 4 children who are all just recently graduated from college and going about their world. And as I watched them, make decisions, I realized that, people make these massive decisions, with somewhat kind of limited data and, on impulse almost. I thought to myself, what if, I had not gone to medical school? What if I'd gone to the CIA? What would my life have been like? And that led to the other character in the book, who's this a cardiologist by the name of Mark Brand. Mark wanted to go to medical school, but he was waitlisted for medical school. And so as a consequence of not having anything to do, he applies to the CIA, very similar to what happened to me in my life. But in Mark's case, he actually was accepted into the CIA. And right about as he's about to trundle off to the farm where people go to be indoctrinated and trained, he gets a call from medical school saying, "Hey, a late spot opened for you. Would you come?" And the interesting thing about that is that actually happened to a friend of mine. When I started medical school, I was there for a week, and all of a sudden I looked next to me. There's this kid that I just sitting there, and who's still a good friend of mine, by the way. And I said to him, I said, "Hey, how you doing?" He goes, "Good." I said, "What are you doing here?" And because the medical school classes are only 80 people big, and after a week, I already had recognized everybody that was there. He goes, "Well, I applied to medical school. I got waitlisted, and they called me yesterday, and they said, someone just dropped out, and we think it's still early enough in the process that, would you be interested in the spot?" And so he came, and he graduated, and he's an ER doc to this day.
Cool.
So it was that experience that I had, and got me thinking, geez, what if I had, gotten into the CIA and not medical school? What would my life be like? And that became the other character in this book, the other lead character.
Well, Peter, tell me, what are sales like for you?
So, my books with Bookouture have sold well. So that's the Vatican Conspiracy and the Vatican Secret. My first book, which was the Intern, that was with a small U.S. publisher, and the sales were reasonably good, kind of thing. But I certainly have done a lot better with the Bookouture books. I have had pretty good sales and made some money. I am not a bestseller, although I did the Vatican Conspiracy did get to be number 2 in thrillers in Australia for a very short period of time. If you get to the number 1, even for a brief period of time, Amazon will send you a little icon that'll say number 1 Amazon bestseller. I came so close.
Oh, yes.
Didn't get it. But mostly I'm having fun and learning a lot.
Well, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show. It's been fascinating to hear you tell me about your life story and all about your books. Is there any way that you can let the people know where they can buy your books?
Yeah, so the best way is just go to Amazon. I'm on Barnes and Noble, Kobo. I don't know if you're familiar with Kobo, but
Mhm.
I happen to sell a lot of books on Kobo.
Mhm.
So I love them as a consequence of that. But Amazon would be the easiest. I have an author page. I've got some stuff on there if you're interested in me and my background kind of thing.
Okay.
The books are available. You just click on a link and you'll get you can either get I have audiobooks. That's another thing that another box I wanted to check
Mhm.
was an audiobook. And my original the Vatican Conspiracy, the editorial board did decide to produce an audiobook right from the get-go. For the Vatican Secret, they did not do that, but it was picked up by another publisher to do the audiobook. So I do have 2 audiobooks out, which I was very pleased about. So if you're interested in the paperback, the digital copy for the e-readers, or for an audiobook, you just click right on Amazon and you get it.
Good. Good. Well, I hope that you get some more sales.
I certainly hope so too,
For
John.
sure. Peter, it's
And
been a pleasure to have you on the show.
John, I very much enjoyed this, and I so happy that that you were able to fit me in. I really do appreciate it.
My pleasure. You take care of yourself now.
All right, cheers.
Bye-bye. And that's our show for today. If you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then please hit the like button and subscribe. And don't forget to ring that bell for future notifications. And if you are a self-published author, I would really like to speak with you. Until such time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.